Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming to you from the Mozaic Works studios. And today I have my usual guest, Adi. Hi, Adi.
Hello.
The topic for today is the new ThoughtWorks Tech Radar. But before we go into that, it's been a week since 2 weeks since we've talked. So what have you done? What else is new with you?
Well, being busy, many things, working with teams around very different topics, from enterprise architecture to building a new product with personas and trying to validate assumptions around user stories, user experience interviews, and also the usual impediment unblocking different sorts that happens when you work with bigger organizations.
All right. I'm also preparing a course on agile product management. And we already had a lot of materials, but now I'm reviewing those and also trying to read more and do some more research and figuring out what's the state of the art today. And it's been very interesting to read, particularly about these topics, how to validate ideas before you actually start developing, how you probably shouldn't have a roadmap because a roadmap is a list of outputs and not of outcomes, how people are misusing OKRs, and all kinds of things like that. And it's been very, very interesting to learn about all these things. Well, learn more about these things. I knew a lot of the techniques, but looking at those, particularly from people who are very experienced and passionate about product development, it's been wonderful. So it's a very hard topic. As programmers, we think of technology as being hard, but figuring out a product that actually works in a market.
Yeah, it's also because you need some skills that don't you don't find these skills in a university or after workshop. You need so many various skills, from looking at tactical and strategical, from the tactical and strategical point of view. You need to think about the users, and that means already going sometimes very deep into psychology and sociology, and you also need to know how to write really well. You need to know how to express yourself really well with many different groups of people, from sponsors or investors, top management, to programmers, testers, analysts. You need to be able to give all of them the same meaning, the same message through different words. It's very difficult to do that. And I guess the bigger the organization, the more difficult it is to do this, because you have more overhead. And then you need to understand how to measure all these things. Are we going on the right path? Do we have the right skills? Do we have the right outcomes? So it's really a difficult task to be a product manager. And on the top, you are the only brokeable neck.
Yeah, that's true.
So
I also found out one interesting thing, that the Scrum creators actually named product owner to be, let's say, more powerful than a product manager. So not only manages but owns the product. But what
Yes.
happens in organizations most of the times is that you have product owners that are reporting to product managers
Mm-hmm.
in some sort. But okay, well, if you are interested in these kinds of topics, we can discuss them at a later time. For now, the topic of today is volume 27 of ThoughtWorks Technology Radar. This is a very interesting tool. It's a tool that I've been using for a while and is very useful for architects, for CTOs who try to find and to understand where the industry is moving and what they should try out where. And just to explain it a little bit, ThoughtWorks publishes this every once in a while. I think it's yearly, but I'm not sure. They recently announced this new version. How this works is you have these circles that define their advice for you. So techniques or tools, or we'll see that there are techniques, tools, languages and frameworks and platforms, the 4 quadrants. And here's in the circle you have advice to adopt, to try, to assess, and to hold. Hold basically means don't don't adopt it, or not just yet. Assess, look at it, see if it makes sense to you. Trial is a stronger recommendation. Try it out in your organization, and adopt things that you should adopt. And it's always very interesting to see what they put here. Now, as they say, this is an opinionated guide to technology frontiers. So it is their opinion. This doesn't fit every organization. In fact, the advice is to build your own radar, and you have here also an option to build your own radar, but of course you don't have to use these tools. But it's something that I've advised tech leaders from organizations for a long time. Build your own radar. Architects, CTO, technical managers, figure out what are the things that you want to try or assess or and so on in your organization that makes sense to you. But let's look a bit through what they think is more important. And let's start with techniques. The first one is path to production mapping. And what this is fundamentally is what they say is we often come across organizations that are unfamiliar with the practice. The activities are most often done in a workshop with a cross-functional group of people that includes everyone involved in designing, developing, releasing, and operating the software around a shared whiteboard. You list the steps in the process in order from the developer workstation all the way to production. This is basically a value stream map. At least this is how I've done it. And it is foundational. You should know what it takes for software to get from your developer workstation to production. And I mean all the way to production.
Yes.
It's also the first step to automate, right? But apparently it's not that known. So
Yeah, I don't know by name. I didn't know it in the beginning as well, but by reading it, I knew it. So maybe that is one of the reasons. But I guess if you make a pipeline for delivery, you kind of know what you're doing there. I hope.
I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe you're making a suboptimal pipeline because you haven't done the analysis.
Yes, that's very possible.
Right. Or maybe you are skipping some things and still keeping some manual steps, as I've heard. it happen. So yeah,
Yes.
this is about figuring out the steps so that you can automate in a proper way. And I would say also optimize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably. Because you will identify in this analysis things that should be done different. So if you just automate the first things that comes to your head, that's not good. You should analyze if it makes sense,
Yeah.
try it out, and then continue with the automation.
And this is particularly necessary in a complex environment. If you just have one application, it's fairly easy. But if you have things like hardware and software and whatever, then it starts to become quite complicated.
Yeah.
Second concept, team cognitive load. Team interaction is a key concept when redesigning an organization for business agility and speed. But the problem with this, basically what they are saying, is that you can overload your teams. So you should pay attention to the team cognitive load. This is something took from the book called Team Topologies, which I heard is a very good book.
Mm-hmm.
And they've also created and recommend a template for assessing the team cognitive load. I think is very important. And I think it also fits with that the notion of, okay, we have T-shaped engineers, but how much can we actually stretch them?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Typically, going even more than T-shape, you even if you don't use T-shape, you could stretch people because they don't know exactly, they don't know anymore what they're doing.
Yeah.
And this is a main cause for defects, a main root cause for defects.
Yeah. And particularly when you also need to learn at the same time, it's starting to get quite complicated. Yeah, so not much to comment here. Third, threat modeling. If you are not doing threat modeling, you should. It's not a new technique, it's quite an old technique. I'm still surprised that people don't know about it. Threat modeling is about figuring out the possible threats to your product in terms of security and dealing with them at all phases in development. So from architecture, development, delivery, deployment, and testing. Right. Not much to say here. Right.
Yeah, I think I know this for many years, and it's yeah, it's essential to follow it no matter what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so these were the adoption recommendations for techniques. Let's look at platforms. This was interesting to me because these are things that I'm not that familiar. So they recommend something called Backstage. In an increasingly digital world, improving developer effectiveness in large organizations is often a core concern of senior leaders. We've seen enough value of developer portals in general, and Backstage in particular, that we are happy to recommend it in Adopt. Backstage is an open source developer portal platform created by Spotify that improves discovery of software assets across the organization. It uses Markdown tech docs that live along the code for each service, which nicely balances the need of centralized discovery with the need of distributed ownership of assets. So I imagine this is kind of like a library. Let's quickly look at. Yeah, so it's on open platform for building developer portals. I think particularly in a large company, it's important to know this is information that's very useful. So, you have services, libraries, whatever you have, different kinds of assets, and what is their life cycle, who is owning them, what do they do, things like that. So that when you have a problem, you need to solve it, you can search for something that already exists in the organization. Have you seen anything like that with your clients?
No. Unfortunately, the tools for this are very cumbersome.
Yeah, I
That's
think
why it makes sense.
yeah, I
I
think
never tried this one. So.
most companies, I think, use Jira and Confluence, and maybe they create a space in Confluence for this, but it's not the same thing. It's much more cumbersome.
And that awful how it's called, SharePoint.
SharePoint. Are people still using SharePoint? That's
of course. Not just for storing documents, but also for in-house applications, let's say. So if you cannot develop something, you develop an application in SharePoint. Yes. So
one thing that I'd be curious to see if it fits here is the API documentation and ability to test it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Which is something that I've advocated for whenever I was with the customers. Look, we have these APIs, but other people need to know how to use them, and we need to give them some good documentation. You already have the documentation because you're writing it. Typically in that specialized tool for API, Postman, I think, not.
No, Postman is just for code.
Postman is for testing.
I think OpenAPI and Swagger.
In Swagger, yeah. Many teams were using Swagger, but then
that's kind of a standard, yeah.
Yeah, but then the Swagger documentation gets lost. You don't know where to find it. It's very difficult. So I can see this working really well if you can add, first of all, it's Markdown, which I love. And second, I see it has plugins, but I won't go there. It would be interesting to be able to publish the Swagger documentation as well. And then you'd have something really powerful, right?
Yeah.
So good tool. We're also learning about these tools, right? It's not like we know them. The second one is Delta Lake. This is something that I don't quite understand.
It's about huge data sets. So when we talk about big organizations that have a lot of data, and there is the need of reporting typically, or the need of having all the data somewhere, and there's this concept of a data lake. You basically put all the data there.
Yeah, that is what I also knew, but this is actually on top of that.
Yes.
So Delta Lake, it's an open source storage layer that attempts to bring ACID transactions to big data processing.
Exactly, yes. So it's improving the data lakes with ACID transactions.
One thing that I find interesting is that you can, using this storage, so this storage is better than the file storage type like AWS S3 or ADLS. All right.
Apparently. I never tried it, but
yeah. So this is a bit out of my knowledge area, but it is interesting to see, and I can imagine for data reports, business intelligence, things like that you need something like that. All right, let's look at, what should we do? Let's look at tools before languages.
Yes.
tools. These are very interesting, actually. Usually I'm not that big on tools. I like a few tools that work. And the new tools, I tend to be more conservative. But this is very cool. Great expectations. Again, something for data. So the problem they are describing with this is that you are automatically testing your code, but you're not automatically testing your data.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a framework, Great Expectations, that allows you to craft built-in controls that flag anomalies or quality issues in data pipelines. Just as unit tests run in a build pipeline, Great Expectation makes assertions during the execution of a data pipeline. So I imagine things like migration or moving things from one service to another, but you need to go through multiple steps, not just one step. And then you can add asserts at every step, but asserts that are based on data. So things like expect column values to be between minimum value and maximum value.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because, like, the other day we were talking with one of the teams I'm working with about the fact that the data they have, it's the data quality they have is poor, so it's inconsistent. You have all sorts of characters that shouldn't be there and so on. So this is really interesting because typically with data, the rule is that it's best to make sure that you have clean data from the source. So no matter how much you want to make a new UI working well with all validations and so on, still you cannot block it sometimes. So that's why what you can do is have such a tool, and it will flag some data that it's not as it should be, so you can fix it fast.
Yeah.
Say in a back office kind of way.
So this is what they are saying is what it doesn't do is not a pipeline execution framework. It integrates seamlessly with execution tools such as Airflow, dbt, Prefect, Dexter, Kedro.
Mm-hmm.
It does not store data. It deals in metadata. And it currently works best in a Python environment. So these are some limitations, but at least it's interesting to see that this exists. It is something that I could have used a few weeks ago when I was doing data migration.
It's true.
So, all right. And the second one is called K6. And this is very interesting because performance testing is something that is, from what I've seen, it's not done enough. It's not very easy to do. It's still cumbersome, and still not many teams are doing it early enough, often enough, So this K6 is a tool that has a low-code test builder that allows you to do performance testing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's called the best developer experience for load testing. It's an open source or SAS, which is, again, this makes sense. So maybe for corporations, it's a bit of a problem because it's security things and data privacy and stuff like that. But if they have the right agreements, privacy agreements and all that, it makes sense that for doing performance testing, you will need some kind of a server, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is how you write some tests, which is, again, it's quite good. It looks almost like a unit test. Well, it's JavaScript, which is not my favorite thing nowadays, but
Yeah, but it's simple.
simple, it works. And it works with GraphQL, it works with cookies, it works with WebSocket, and so on. So yeah, if you can do more performance testing, that would be great. And if you can do it more often and earlier in the process.
Yes.
Do your teams do some performance testing now?
Yeah, but it's typically very cumbersome. New environment, when that you need a new environment for this, and that takes a while, and then you're never able to make that environment that you wish for that is identical to production. So there are still some approximations to be made, and then you run your tests, but the scenarios typically are not enough, in my view. It's just the bare basic to make sure that things work, and then when you go to production, sometimes it happens that something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Because of configurations usually, and not because of anything else.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, figuring out the environment. All right, let's look at languages and frameworks.
Ooh.
Which, honestly, this is my least favorite part. But let's see. Maybe there's something interesting here. So there's something called IO-TS, and the description: our teams developing in TypeScript are finding IO-TS invaluable, especially when interacting with APIs that ultimately result in the creation of objects with specific types. So
it's very specific to because I see here it bridges the gap between compile time checking and runtime consumption. So it's very specific to these languages where you have
TypeScript, which is built on top of JavaScript, which already. So just as an aside, for me, it's always a problem when we have languages that compile in other languages. I'm never certain that they will work correctly.
Well, Microsoft did the same with the.
Yeah, and it was really good.
With that common language, I don't remember the name, and they compiled everything like C#, F#, and everything was compiled into that.
Oh yeah, but that was different because that was the it was a low level.
Yeah,
it was like an assembly, but for a virtual machine, and you can actually do that today in on the web by compiling these languages to WebAssembly.
Mm-hmm.
Now the problem is that nobody does that.
But I think JavaScript starts being like an assembly, right? I think that's the trend now.
Well, there are a few languages that are nicely designed. This is something we have to say. So I think TypeScript. What else was the? There are some functional languages built on top of JavaScript.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which are closure script, right? And those
there are many of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think in terms of language design, it's very good. But to me, the core problem of this is that they compile into JavaScript. And whenever you have a translation layer, already JavaScript has some problems with interpreting some things in a weird way, right? So my problem is that when you compile some code that you write into another language, you are already adding another level of potential failure. And well, I would be curious to talk with people who are actually using these languages and see if they found any situations when, you have a very weird error that is caused by the underlying JavaScript execution instead of the code that you wrote. But yeah, this is something that I find. If they would start to compile things to WebAssembly, then that's a completely different thing, because that is a low level.
Yeah, well, I guess people know already that you don't like JavaScript, so
Yeah. Well, I don't have a big problem with JavaScript per se, but everything that has built on top of it is not that elegant in terms of technologies, but we've discussed this before.
yeah.
All right, next one, Kotlin test, CoTest, standalone testing tool for Kotlin. Okay.
Again, very specific.
Very specific. Interesting thing, it has support for property-based testing. So if you are not using property-based testing,
You should.
you should. You should at least look at it. Nest.js. I love this. In the past, we've cautioned about node overload. I've actually looked at HTMX. I found it very attractive just because I never had to install Node.js or NPM or anything. It just worked. We are still cautious about reasons to choose Node. However, in scenarios where Node.js is required to build backend applications, our team are reporting that Nest.js is a suitable option to enable developers to create testable, scalable, loosely coupled, and easily maintainable applications in enterprise. Nest.js is a TypeScript-first framework that makes the development of Node.js applications safer and less error-prone. Nest.js is opinionated and comes with solid principles and an Angular-inspired architecture out of the box.
I don't think that's really a good thing, but yeah. the last one, not solid principles.
Yeah, solid principles, testing, so on. That sounds good. Angular-inspired architecture, well, Angular was pretty good. The problem is that it was, once again, quite complicated, but the principles were pretty good.
Simple.
Yeah.
But for complex things, it's really, really overhead. So
yeah,
I guess you can say that it's the same critique as with Rails, Ruby on Rails. That it's very easy to do something simple, but when you have something complicated, it starts being overwhelming.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Might be good for something small, but we need to look more. I don't know more details.
Next one, React Query. Often described as the missing data fetching library for React. Okay, I'm out. I don't really care about React. I don't really care about fetching data for React. But, well, if you do, this is it. Swift Package Manager. So apparently since 2014, Swift didn't have a package manager, and now it has.
Okay, wow. I never worked with Swift, so I didn't know that. Wow. So what were they doing?
Well, I guess installing things. Like in C++. C++ doesn't have a package manager now.
Yeah.
So it's a big problem.
But you have header files, right?
Yeah, but header files don't solve your the library dependencies.
Of course they don't. Anyway, yeah, it's shocking. This is a new new technology. Swift is a new technology. You cannot really compare it to C++. So
Yeah. But it could be worse. I mean, it could be C++ and still not.
I guess there's a tradition in C++ not having a package manager. It's just by design, not more.
Well, I'm lying. Microsoft built a package manager for C++. So,
But nobody's using it.
I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe people who are developing
So we need to make a survey
Windows. Yeah.
see how people do package
And
management in C++.
And the reason I know that is because we also have an interview with two people from Microsoft who are working on this, on this
Yeah.
channel. Why JS? Why are all of these for JavaScript? Okay. Conflict-free replicated data type algorithms are proven to be able to automatically distribute and merge changes among peers without conflict. But in practice, even for small enough data, these algorithms usually require a significant amount of memory to trace all the changes made by different peers, thus making them impractical. And this is why JS is a carefully optimized implementation that keeps memory consumption at a reasonable level for large data sets and millions of modifications.
Okay.
I have no idea what this is about. I would imagine for things like real-time editors with more people typing or things like that.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's it. All right, so these were the things that they recommend to adopt. Now, I won't go to all of the other things because as you can see, the next circle is quite big.
Yeah, we need a few hours probably.
Yeah.
It's gonna be boring and we're gonna be tired.
And the goal is not to do that. But I saw a few things that were interesting. So let's see if I can quickly. Oh yeah. This one, very interesting. You know how hard it is to test that emails are sent? To write automatic tests for this? Well, not anymore, because apparently there's something called, this is one of the tools, fake SMTP server, which you can install and you can configure and you can run for tests.
So that's like a fake that someone wrote for it, a fake server, instead of writing your own, because that's what I was doing more or less. Well, you had two options, right? You either using mocks in low-level testing, like in unit testing, or you would have a simulator or fake when using end-to-end tests or integrated tests or integration tests.
Yeah, but using mocks would only test that you are calling your code that is calling the, but it doesn't test that the emails are actually sent correctly.
Exactly. So that's why you need the two approaches. First of all, have these micro tests with mocks, and then write your own simulator or fake SMTP server to do this.
Yeah, and there's also something called Mountebank, which has an API. So basically send an email using SMTP and then you check the emails using a REST API. And yeah, this is brilliant. It's something that I've often needed. It will not solve 100% of the problems, but it will solve problems like there are some weird characters, or your email address is not valid, or things like that. Things related to the format of the email.
Yeah.
Another thing that's interesting, software bill of materials. You know how we keep using a lot of things, a lot of dependencies, and you never know what dependencies you are using?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a problem for security. So now the National Institute of Standards of Technology, NIST, has some advice for adopting these things, which is called a software bill of materials, which is a machine readable list of things that are in your software. This will be very long for Node, including things like wrapping letters and stuff like that. But yeah, I think I understand why they are not putting it in adopt. It's still difficult, but it's where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And by the way, they are recommending Assess for Cupid,
Mm-hmm.
which we've already talked about
Yes.
at length. And something very interesting, GitHub push protection. A lot of developers push by mistake credentials to their AWS to GitHub. And this is a problem for enterprises. In GitHub, you can now, for specific accounts, for licensed accounts, you can protect against that.
Mm-hmm.
And very important. I absolutely agree. All right. So these were some techniques. Let's quickly go to... I'm not so interested in platforms. I think tools was... Let's see if I can find... Microservices. We've been talking about tailored service templates ever since we first identified microservices as a thing. If an organization sets out to create a collection of small services that can be developed, built, deployed, and operated independently but consistently, it makes sense to give teams a solid starting point that aligns to the standard. However, the template evolves over time in response to changing technical and business requirements. Projects based on older version of the template fall out of date. Retrofitting template improvements into an established project become a major pain. Craft attempts to address this problem by providing tools to identify and patch differences between a local project and the current head of a master template repository. So, again, real problem? Well, actually, my impression is that most teams who use microservices don't use templates, which is already a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
So you first have to use templates to have this problem, but right, first use templates. Let's start from the basics.
Yeah.
What else was... And something that I found interesting, X-bar for build monitoring. There used to be in the old days of continuous integration, we used to have a tray in the operating system and something called CC tray, which would show you information about your build. Mm-hmm. Apparently, this doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work as well. So we need new techniques, and apparently XBAR, RAMs, these are a few of those. Just to get notifications on your desktop when build fails.
Mm.
That's what it's about. Okay, and I think I took a look. Just a moment. Let's see if I can find... languages and frameworks. Right, one that's very interesting, Camunda.
Mm-hmm.
Camunda is basically a workflow.
Mm-hmm.
It says process orchestration for end-to-end automation. Now, I don't really know Camunda. I'm wondering whether it's a kind of long-running workflow that you integrate, or is it for your production code,
No, so
or it's more.
what it does is when you it does a really good job in integrating different integrations or microservices in the workflow that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And typically many systems are workflows, so there are some business steps you need to get through, and for each of the step you need to call some microservices. So if you have those microservices with Camunda, you just orchestrate how the workflow is going.
Yeah.
So it's really fast, easy. I think the only issue is that it can become a single point of failure.
Yeah. Obviously. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of workflows because I think nowadays what you have this ability of splitting into APIs in a way or another, whether you have them as serverless or microservices or some kind of larger API that runs on server, doesn't matter. No. But then you need to put them all together. And I think workflows are a very good solution for that, and particularly when you can visualize them. When you can look at them, when you can show them to domain experts maybe, when you can map them to actual domain processes or transformations, they are very, very powerful. And yeah, so I'm a big fan. But as you said, yeah, can be a single point of failure.
There are for this as well some solutions, but let's not go into details.
Yeah, of course. What else was here? Not very interesting. Yeah, I learned that apparently Android had 1, 2, 3 APIs for media, and now they have a 4th API for media, which is a good thing apparently.
Good. Yeah, it's like JavaScript frameworks.
And then, yeah, this is not very interesting. Kotlin. Kotlin is a nice language, but I'm not so interested in this. And another one of those web component frameworks. That might actually be interesting. Svelte. So you know that you could write web components. So basically split your application, split your front end into components that you can reuse.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a way, there's a standard for that. You can do it using a standard. What I'm not happy about these things, there are a bunch of such frameworks that you can use to write this kind of web components. But the problem for me is, once again, what's all this with npm? Let's get rid of it. You always need to npm install something. I found others that I'd like to test. Maybe I'll do a series about writing web components without Node. But the idea is good. Okay, so.
Okay.
One last thing before we close. I found something very interesting. I think it was in. Yeah, this. This is in trial. No, it's in assess. And I was wondering when this will come up. We have a bunch of architectural characteristics that we look at. Performance, scalability, security, reliability being the usual four, but a few others. Operational cost can be others. Well, I've been saying for a few months, for a year, I think, that we'll probably need to take into account some power consumption related. And they basically say carbon efficiency as an architectural characteristic. So it will be interesting for architects to prepare and figure out, these metrics. What do we measure? How do we measure carbon efficiency, and how do we prepare for it? Move everything to C++?
JavaScript.
No, because according to studies, C++ is one of the most carbon efficient languages.
Yeah, okay. We should use Go. Okay.
Yeah. So this is the technology radar. There are also some themes here. I didn't go through those, but all in all, really interesting tool, I think. It's good to build your own radar, but here you have a lot of information that you can take into account for your own context. Would you like to add anything else, Adi?
There are so many tools that pop up now. Even if they come into this radar, it's important to make sure that really helps you. So I would recommend anyone before starting to use this type of tools in production to do a spike or more spikes, and not just say taking the newest shiniest one and say we need to use this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the ThoughtWorks people who build this would definitely agree with you. I just wanted to show. Yeah, okay. There's a bunch of people who we know that have built this. Martin Fowler, and clicked on download, but it doesn't work. I had them in a list. So it's a bunch of very smart people who are building this, and they would definitely agree that you need to test before you you follow their recommendations. All right, this is it for today. Thank you, Adi, for joining.
Thank you.
And here we are. What do you think about the tech radar, about the new thing? What do you think about tools, techniques, languages, platforms? Are there any interesting ones that you are using? Share them with us in a comment. We love comments. It's the way that we get together. And I'm always looking forward to reading them and to have an interesting chat in the comment section. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.